All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into something well, it's happening all around us, really. Every time you shop online, every time you browse.
It's that invisible hand of data, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about how businesses use data to predict what customers will do next, like what you'll buy, what you'll click on, all that. And the technique behind a lot of this is called regression analysis.
It sounds kind of, well, maybe a bit technical.
Oh, it can be, but the results, let me tell you, they can be pretty mind-blowing. In fact, there's this story about Target, the retailer. You probably heard it.
Oh yeah, the expectant father story.
Yeah, that one. So this dad, he's fuming because his teenage daughter starts getting coupons in the mail, for baby stuff.
Yeah.
Cribs, diapers, the whole 9 yards.
And he's thinking, what are they trying to encourage teenage pregnancy?
Right. So he marches down to the store, gives the manager an earful. The manager, they apologize, of course. But then, get this, a few weeks later, the dad calls back, sheepishly. Turns out his daughter was pregnant.
Wow, so Target knew before he did.
Yeah, and you know what played a big part in that?
I'm guessing regression analysis?
Bingo. They were looking at her shopping patterns, things she was buying. And they had built this model, this regression model, that could spot patterns that indicated a high chance of pregnancy.
It's amazing what you can find when you start connecting the dots, right? Like, who would have thought that buying unscented lotion and vitamins could be a predictor?
Right. It makes you wonder what else is hidden in all that data we generate every day. So in this deep dive, we're going to break down how this regression thing actually works, what it can tell us. We'll look at things like how businesses predict which customers might leave, what they call churn.
Churn, yeah, that's a big one, especially for businesses like banks or subscription services.
Right. And we'll even look at how Hollywood tries to predict those big opening weekend box office numbers for movies.
Always a gamble, right?
Total gamble. So we've got a video transcript here and a PDF that really lay out the basics.
Great resources to get started.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Our goal today, our mission, is to make sure you walk away understanding those core ideas behind regression analysis, and how it's used for prediction.
So by the end of this, you'll be able to impress your friends at parties with your newfound data science knowledge.
Haha, exactly. Okay, so let's start with this customer churn thing. Now, if you're a business and you're building those long-term relationships with customers, think like a bank.
Yeah, banks, telecom companies, where customer loyalty is crucial.
Exactly. Losing customers, losing them to the competition, that's churn. And it can really hurt their bottom line.
Makes sense. It's always more expensive to attract new customers than to keep the ones you have happy.
Right. So if they can figure out who's thinking of leaving, before it happens.
They can intervene, maybe offer some incentives, improve their service.
Right. So how does regression help a bank, let's say, figure out who's about to jump ship?
Well, they have tons of data on their customers, right?
Oh, yeah, they track everything. Our sources here, they give us a simplified picture, but it's a good starting point. They look at things like the average amount you have in your account, how much you've borrowed, if you've been borrowing more or less lately.
Makes sense. Your financial behavior is a pretty good indicator.
Right. Even your zip code, whether you own a car. If you respond to those promotional mailings, household income. You throw it all in.
And that's where the magic of regression comes in. It can tell you which of those factors actually has a strong connection to someone closing their account.
It's not just, oh, people with low balances leave. It's like, how much more likely are they to leave? And what if they have a low balance, but they always respond to promotions?
Exactly. Regression can weigh all those different factors, see how they all work together.
Yeah, it's like a multi-dimensional view of your customers.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so powerful. You can isolate the effect of each piece of information while keeping everything else constant.
Okay, now let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk movies. I mean, who doesn't love a good blockbuster?
Oh, I'm a huge movie buff.
Me too. But imagine you're a studio executive. You've just poured millions into this new film, and you're about to release it. Will it be a hit? Will it flop? I mean, that's a lot of pressure.
It's a huge financial gamble, and that's why being able to predict those opening weekend numbers, even roughly, is so valuable.
It's everything, right? It tells you how much to spend on marketing, where to release it, even whether to make similar movies in the future. So what are those things, those factors that might influence how much a movie makes on its opening weekend?
Well, there's the obvious stuff like the pre-sale tickets, how much buzz there is before it even opens.
Right. Our sources also talk about the movie's budget, how many theaters it's playing in, what the critics are saying. Those reviews can make or break a movie.
Oh, yeah, especially these days with all the online review sites. And then there's the MPAA rating, PG-13, R, all that.
Right, right. And even how long the movie is. Some people don't want to sit through a 3-hour
Yeah,
epic.
definitely. So all these things, they all play a role. The question is, how much of a role? And how do they all work together?
And that's where regression comes in again. We can build a model where the opening box office, that's what we're trying to predict. And all those other things, pre-sales, budget, reviews, they become our variables. You can almost picture it as an equation.
Right, like opening box office equals something times pre-sales plus something times the critic score and so on for all the other factors.
Exactly. But here's the catch. We don't know those somethings. Those are what statisticians call coefficients. They tell us how strong each factor is and whether it has a positive or negative impact.
Like, does a higher budget always mean higher box office, or do bad reviews really tank a movie's earnings?
Right. We need to figure out those mystery coefficients. So how do we do that?
We look to the past. We can look at a bunch of movies that have already come out, and we have all that data, right?
And what
Box
we-
office numbers, pre-sales, reviews, budgets, everything. And that's where multiple regression comes in.
Multiple regression. It's like a data detective. It sifts through all those past movies, finds the patterns, and gives us an equation. In fact, our PDF actually shows us a general form of that equation. It's like box office equals beta 0 plus beta 1 times pre-sales plus beta 2 times the critic score and so on, plus this thing called epsilon.
Beta 0, beta 1, those are the unknown coefficients we're trying to figure out. And epsilon, that's our error term.
Right. So the error term, it's like an acknowledgement that our model, as good as it might be, won't capture everything.
It represents all those unpredictable things, right? Like maybe a celebrity tweets about the movie, or there's some crazy viral marketing campaign, or maybe just rains on opening weekend.
Yeah, stuff happens.
Yeah.
But the goal of regression is to get those betas, those coefficients, as accurate as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So our model gets as close to reality as possible. And it does that, as the video explains, by minimizing the sum of squared errors.
So we're trying to minimize the difference between what our model predicts and what actually happened in the past.
Exactly. We're trying to find that perfect line,
Yeah.
that best fits all those data points.
And it's not just about the line itself, right? It's about understanding the space around the line, all those data points that are kind of scattered around it. That's where the real insight lies.
Now let's zoom in on a simpler version of this, what's called simple regression. Simple regression just looks at two variables, one dependent, one independent.
Right, like how much those pre-sale numbers alone can predict the opening box office, just those two things.
Exactly. And there's a great visual for this. Imagine you have a graph. Each dot on the graph represents a movie. On one axis, you have the pre-sales. On the other axis, you have the opening box office.
So you'd see all these dots scattered across the graph, some high, some low. And what simple regression does, it tries to draw a straight line through all those dots.
That's our trend line.
Yeah.
And the closer those dots are to that line, the better our prediction is. And guess what? Our PDF even gives us an example of this. It says y equals 13.775x plus 40 plus 06. That's the equation for the line. And then it has this r-squared value of 0.6679.
Okay, so let's unpack that. First, the equation. That's the mathematical representation of that trend line we were talking about. It tells you for every increase in pre-sales, how much you can expect the box office to increase.
And that r-squared, what's that all about?
That tells you how well that line actually fits the data. It's a number between 0 and 1. The closer it is to 1, the tighter those dots are clustered around the line, the better the fit.
So an r-squared of 0.6679, is that good? Bad?
It's not bad,
Yeah,
but it
bad.
means there's still a lot of variability that our simple model isn't capturing. There are other factors at play beyond just pre-sales.
Right. Makes sense. Okay, so let's say we've run our regression analysis. We've got all these fancy equations and numbers. Now what? How do we make sense of it all? Our sources mention that the output, it usually has a summary of statistics, an ANOVA table, and a table of coefficients.
Yeah, and don't get too intimidated by those terms. For our purposes today, we're mainly interested in that first summary and the coefficients table.
Right. Let's start with r-squared. We already talked about that a bit with simple regression, but now it's for our bigger model with all those variables. So remind me again, what does r-squared tell us?
R-squared tells us how much of the total variation in what we're trying to predict, in this case box office revenue, is explained by our model. Think of it as a percentage.
Okay, so if our r-squared is high, that means our model is doing a good job of explaining those box office numbers.
Exactly. It means that the factors we included in the model, things like pre-sales, budget, reviews, they're doing a good job of capturing the patterns in the data.
Our PDF actually gives us an example. It says the R squared is 0.783. So what does that mean in plain English?
It means that our model, with all the variables we've included, explains about 78.3% of the variation in box office revenue. The other 21.7%, that's due to factors we didn't include, the error term, those random things we can't predict.
Okay, so our model's pretty good, but not perfect. Now let's look at that coefficients table. This is where we get those specific numbers, those coefficients for each of our variables, right?
Right, and there are a few other things in there, like the standard error, the t-statistic, the p-value, and the confidence intervals. But for today, we're going to focus on the p-value.
The p-value. Now that sounds scary, but our video makes it pretty clear.
Yeah, it's not as complicated as it sounds. Basically, the p-value tells us how confident we can be that the relationship we're seeing between a variable and the box office, how confident we can be that it's not just random chance.
And the general rule is if the p-value is below 0.05, we're pretty confident.
That's the typical threshold, yeah. It means there's a less than 5% chance that the relationship we're seeing is just a fluke. So if we look at our example output in the PDF, we see that pre-sales, the tomato meter score for reviews, and the movie's budget, they all have p-values below 0.05.
So those are the things that really matter for predicting box office success. But what do those actual coefficients tell us? Like for pre-sale, the coefficient is 9.74. What does that mean?
It means that for every extra dollar in pre-sales, holding everything else constant, you can expect the opening box office to go up by $9.74. Or, to make the numbers a bit easier to grasp, for every $1 million in pre-sales, we're looking at a $9.74 million increase in the box office.
That's pretty significant.
Okay.
Okay, what about tomato meter? The coefficient is 64305.08. Now that's a big number.
It is, but remember, the tomato meter score is a percentage. So what this means is that for every 1 percentage point increase in the tomato meter, meaning more critics are giving it a thumbs up, the box office is expected to increase by roughly $64,305.
So good reviews, they do matter. And finally, the coefficient for budget, $1 million, is 104,259.43.
So for every $1 million added to the budget, the box office is predicted to increase by about $104,259. Now, of course, that doesn't mean just throwing money at a movie guarantees success.
Right, there are plenty of big budget flops out there, but it does suggest that, on average, higher budgets tend to lead to higher box office returns.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting because now we can start to see how these different factors trade off against each other. The video gives a good example of this with the tomato meter and pre-sales.
Right, so if the tomato meter score goes up by 1 point, how much would the pre-sales need to drop to keep the expected box office the same?
Well, we know that a 1-point increase in the tomato meter is worth about $64,305 at the box office. And for pre-sales, each dollar is worth $9.74. So if we do a little division, we find that a 1-point bump in the tomato meter is roughly equivalent to about $6,602 more in pre-sales.
So basically, better reviews can offset lower pre-sales to some extent. Makes you wonder what a studio would prioritize, right?
It's a fascinating strategic decision. Do you invest more in marketing to boost pre-sales or focus on getting those positive reviews?
Okay, so we've built our model, we understand the coefficients, but how do we actually use all this to predict the box office for a new movie, one that hasn't come out yet?
That's the payoff. Let's say we have a new movie. Based on early buzz and marketing, we think pre-sales will be $1 million. We're expecting a tomato meter score of 80. The budget was $100 million. It's going to open in 4,000 theaters. It's a 2-hour movie, and it's rated PG-13.
Our PDF even walks through an example like this. And you'll notice that for the MPAA rating, instead of just putting PG-13, they have these variables, MPAA-PG and MPAA-PG-13. What's that all about?
That's because most regression models, they like to work with numbers, not categories. So we need a way to represent those MTA ratings, those categories, as numbers. And the way we do that is with what's called indicator variables or dummy variables.
So how does that work? We have PG, PG-13, and R. How do we turn that into numbers?
Basically, we create new variables, one for each rating except for one, which becomes our baseline. So we have MPA-PG and MPA-PG-13. If a movie is rated PG, MPA-PG gets a 1, MPA-PG-13 gets a 0. If it's PG-13, then it's the other way around, and if it's R, both of those are 0.
Okay, so we're basically giving each rating a unique code, and the model can then see how each rating, compared to that baseline, affects the box office.
Exactly. And we can see the coefficients for MPA-PG and MPA-PG-13 in our output table. They tell us how much each rating, on average, helps or hurts the box office compared to that R rating baseline.
Cool. Okay, time for a quick quiz. Our PDF has some check your learning questions. First one, we have a simple regression model for salaries. It says salary equals 100 minus 20 times female. Now,
Okay.
female is coded as 1 if the employee is female, 0 if not. Salary is measured in thousands of dollars. How do we interpret this?
Okay, so the key here is that coefficient for female, which is onage 20. And remember, salary is in thousands of dollars. So this means that on average, women in this model are earning $20,000 less than men, assuming all other factors are equal.
That's a pretty stark difference. Okay, next question. Regression is a perfect description of the world. True or false?
Definitely false. We've talked about the error term, right? There are always things we can't predict perfectly. Regression gives us a good approximation, but it's not a crystal ball.
Right. It's a simplification, a model. Okay, question 3. In a multiple regression, we can include many x variables. True or false?
True, that's the whole point of multiple regression. We can look at lots of different factors at the same time and see how they all contribute to the outcome.
The more the merrier, as long as they're relevant.
Right.
And last question. The r squared from a regression output shows how well the regression fits the data. When r squared equals 1, it indicates that the regression is a perfect fit of the data. True or false?
True. An r squared of 1 means our model perfectly explains all the variation in the data. All those dots would fall exactly on the regression line. In reality, though, that almost never happens.
Right. So to sum it all up, regression analysis, it's a pretty powerful tool for making predictions. By looking at historical data, we can figure out how different factors are related, and we can use that knowledge to forecast what might happen in the future.
And it's not just some abstract statistical concept, right?
Hmm.
That target story, it shows us how these techniques are being used in the real world, sometimes in ways we might not even realize.
It really makes you think, right? All that data out there, it's telling a story. And with regression analysis, we can start to decipher that story, understand those hidden patterns, and make better predictions about what's coming next.
And as we generate more and more data, the potential applications of regression, they just keep expanding. It's a really exciting field to be a part of.
Absolutely. And while we've covered the basics here, there's so much more to learn. Different types of regression, how to deal with messy data, all sorts of advanced techniques.
Yeah, the world of data analysis, it's a deep rabbit hole. But hopefully, this deep dive has given you a good foundation to start exploring.
Exactly. So the next time you see a targeted ad or a box office prediction, you'll have a better understanding of what's going on behind the scenes. And who knows, maybe you'll even be inspired to dive into the data yourself and uncover some hidden insights.
Now that's a thought-provoking ending.